Hey y'all, welcome back. We're going to be talking about a relatively new medium of acrylic paint on pre-stretched canvases. So all paint, like we talked about last week, is just pigment suspended in some kind of something to make it spread. This can be water or oil, polymer emulsion, so that means it's plastic. This can also be things like resin, and that is what the first kind of paint was, is it was pigment suspended in resin. You can also do like silicone. This also gave us latex paint, which is house paint. The really nice thing about latex paint for house paint is it dries a lot faster than oil paint, because that's what we used to use for everything. So it does. Hi Possum, you wanna come here? Come on. Here's my helper. So with this polymer emulsion, it also has water in it still too, so it's polymer and water. This is why you can mix acrylic paint with water to make it behave more like a watercolor, and then the water evaporates, then you have your polymer and the pigment still on there. But because it's not just pure watercolor, you can also mix it with things called mediums, and you can make the paint act a lot different. So there are some mediums that are really thick, putty, and you can make these really textural art, or you can like mix it with very slippy materials to make it very light washes of color. Pre-stretched canvases are also pretty new. The canvas and painting on canvas is not new. Canvas has been used since like the 1400s. I'll talk more about the history of both the paint and the canvas in a bit. Canvas is typically a just sturdy knit fabric, like denim is a type of canvas. What you used to do is you would buy the canvas, make a frame, stretch the canvas over the frame, and then treat the canvas. Nowadays, it's a lot easier and cheaper to buy a pre-stretched one, and we'll talk in depth that process. When we talk about treating a canvas, we are typically talking about gessoing a canvas. Gesso is just a specific type of paint that is used to cover a surface, so that way paints will stick better for it. People also use it as a verb, so you might hear you need to gesso that before you can paint on it, and you can use gesso on any other surface too. Like you do typically gesso a wooden panel before you paint on it. With canvas, it's a fabric, you can do whatever you want. So you can make tote bags, you could do big sheets, you could do billboards. It's a very versatile medium, and so is acrylic paint. So now let's talk about the history of both of these mediums, because I think that is interesting. Acrylic paint was invented in the 30s and 40s. This is from Wikipedia. So as early as 1934, the first usable acrylic resin dispersion was developed by German chemical company BASF. I don't know if you're supposed to pronounce it as BASF or BASF. And it does combine some of the properties of oil and watercolor. So it's a lot more covering than a watercolor, but it does dry fast and is water soluble. In the late 40s, people started to have the solution to actually be a lot more usable. So let's talk and look at some famous, iconic acrylic painting that really encapsulates this medium is Andy Warhol's soups. You've seen them. They're soup, but they're all acrylic paint. They give you this very nice, flat, opaque covering of color. So we can also see like really beautiful detailed textural art with this Mr. and Mrs. Clark and Percy by David Hockney. All the Rococo paintings, those are all acrylic paint, and we can really see the textural depth and how it does almost look like an oil paint with that like texture and character, but it's acrylic paint. Is a brief history of acrylic paint. I will say also it wasn't really commercially viable until the 50s, and a lot of people in the 50s thought people wouldn't really like it, but now it's like one of the most, I would say in my opinion, this is not scientifically verified, it's one of the most widely used by artists and art students. Let's talk about the history of canvas. Canvas is a lot older than acrylic paint. Some of the oldest paintings that we have found have been from the 1400s. It comes in two basic types, plain and duck. Plain canvas is like what you'd think of like a tote bag. It's a little bit looser weave, it's a little bit more flexible. And then there's duck, which is much more tight and more water resistant. I also found out that duck is from the Dutch word for cloth of dok. I always thought it was called duck because it was watertight. So one of the things that we talked about last week that I wanted to talk about again is like when we think about canvas paintings It feels very expensive. And especially when we start talking about buying enough paint to complete a work of art, we can also spend a lot of money on paint. Let's talk about how to make it cheaper. So for acrylic paint, because it is a pigment in a polymer emulsion, you're probably not going to build your own. Some things are a little bit easier to make it, so like maybe we can make our own watercolors, but acrylic paint is a little bit out of what we need. It can be really cheap to get though. So first and foremost, one of the best ways to get acrylic paint is house paint, because it'll be cheap for a lot of paint. And a lot of people will have extra paint. Ask around if somebody just painted and you like that color, or it's like a nice white or neutral, take it. Because you can mix a little bit of pre-store-bought acrylic paint into latex house paint. It is important to know what paint it is, because if you're using an oil-based house paint, it will not work. Sometimes, like, you can go dumpster dive by like paint stores and Lowe's and stuff. Remember, trespassing is illegal. Most of the time taking stuff out of a dumpster isn't the illegal part, it is the trespassing onto their parking lot. So, just be cautious, don't get arrested. If you are going to like a professional paint store to get stuff, make sure you are not getting really old paint. And same if you're asking friends and family for paint too. A lot of paint before like the 70s has lead and other dangerous chemicals in it, and you don't want to expose yourself to that if you don't have to. So if you are using old house paint, be very cautious and read the labels and make sure it is not anything dangerous, and make sure it's, again, a latex or a water-based, not an oil-based, because the oils and the acrylics won't really mix. So that's how we can get it for really, really cheap or free. Typically for cheap though, you probably can just get away with buying the student grade of acrylic paint. It'll be a little bit more fillers and a little bit less pigment. They will still be pretty easy to use, but you might have to go over it a few more times before you can really build up to what you want it to be. And starting with like a kit that, says like student kit or something like that is typically a pretty good way to start your acrylic paint collection. Acrylic paint also you can use on like anything really, because it's that plastic emulsion, so you can just put it on whatever and it'll stick. It's not weatherproof unless you seal it, but it'll stick to most things. So it's a nice paint to invest in because you can use it with a lot of stuff, and you can also use it really diversely. You can use it as a watercolor, you can use it as an acrylic paint, you can use it to like color house paint. And then if you decide that you really like acrylic paint, then you can start to build up your collection of it by going into artist grade stuff, which is going to have a lot more pigment and less filler. So that's how we can DIY free or cheap acrylic paint. Canvas, there's a couple ways to DIY and be cheap about it. So first and foremost, you can buy everything to make your own canvas, and this lets you have complete and total control of what it's going to be. You buy a bulk roll of canvas, you buy wood to make the frame, any kind of treatment that you want to do to the canvas, again, typically gesso. Then you stretch the canvas, you build your frame, you stretch the canvas over it, you secure the canvas to the frame, and then you treat the canvas, and then you can paint on it. This is really only cheap if you're making a lot or you really want a custom shape. You can also just buy canvas and then go find old flat frames. Poster frames would work really well. You stretch the canvas, seal it, and treat it, and then you can have a really big canvas for cheaper than building your own frame or buying a huge pre-done canvas. Thrift stores are also a really good place to look for frames, and they're also a really good place to look for canvases. A lot of people will buy the pre-treated canvases, use them once, and then Goodwill them because they don't like it anymore. Prime it again, use it again. Then going again to your local art store and buying a pre-done canvas. The other thing that's really nice is buying bulk ones. They end up being like $3 or $4 a canvas, which is really, really wonderful. Another benefit to buying the new canvases is you know exactly what they are and what they're treated with, which can make it a lot less scary and stressful to play. And you can also buy different color canvases, so you can buy like all black instead of all white, so then you can work in a different tone. That is all that we're gonna do in the chair. So we're gonna transition to the studio, and I will see y'all in a second. Hi y'all, welcome to the studio. Wow. So I want to talk about what I have and what materials we'll be using and kind of the overall process, plus some safety tips for when we're working with these mediums. Like we talked about before, you can just get house paint. Oh, this is really messed up. I spilled paint all over it. This was at $2 for all of this paint, which is expensive for house paint, but for acrylic paint, it's really, really cheap. Like we talked about before, please don't drink that. We'll get into it when we talk about the safety, but someone's trying to drink the paint water. You will see somewhere on here, I think it's all under where the paint is, but it'll say what kind of paint it is. And again, you want to try to get the latex paint. Student grade paint is a perfectly fine way to get started in acrylic paint. This particular brand it's called Craft Smart. This is like the brand you get at like any craft store or even something like Target or Walmart. You get them in a big pack typically. These are gonna dry much more matte and flat than your other colors, but it can be a really great way to bulk out other paints, put down like base colors, all that, and they're cheap. You can also upgrade to different student brands. So this is Academy. So this is a little bit nicer brand. It's a little bit more expensive. And then you can actually see in the back, it gives you a lot of information. It tells you, I hope that's clear enough. We gotta do the little makeup focus. You see it? Can you see it? Can you see it? But it tells you a lot, like it's acrylic polymer emulsion, which is exactly what we want. It tells you what pigments are in it, and the light fastness, which is really nice. You are like, yeah, this is the medium for me. Then you can start to upgrade your palette to get into the nicer stuff. As you can see though, the more that we go, the smaller the containers get because these are much more expensive. So I use these for like detail stuff. I also have a lot of paint that I have inherited. So that paint I all bought at, some of it's full price, some of it's discount. This paint is old, but it's also like artist grade paint, and the polymer paint, as long as it doesn't get exposed to air, will stay fine. Like it's all squishy still. And if it does ever dry out a little bit, you can just mix it with water to reactivate the emulsion. With old paint, make sure it does not have lead in it, or it comes in lead tubes, so be very careful with that. The only other thing I want to talk about with acrylic paint, I lied, there's two things. So the first thing is mediums. We talked about this a little bit. I don't super personally use the textural mediums. This is a floating medium, so it's very runny. Oh, hi honey. Here, come sit, come sit. This is my assistant. And this gives your colors, like, you put the paint on it and it like makes these like very beautiful delicate layers. I also use this to mix paint that is a little bit thicker than I want to make it behave more like a watercolor or a wash. The other paint I want to talk about are specialty paints. So I have stuff like this. This is academic level gold glittery paint. It's very cute. So when we look at it, very glimmery and pretty. So maybe not like the highest artistic level grade paint, but it's a lot of fun. And this is also really fun to mix with other stuff. They also sell glitter finishes. So those are all the different kinds of acrylic paints that I use. There are more. Bye, Fanny. Canvases are going to be a little bit less interesting. These are what I use. And so as we can see here, it's a pre-done canvas, so it's all stapled into the frame like this. And we can also see how smooth and flat it is, so it's already been treated. So that means we can just paint on it already. We don't have to do anything with it. I don't really have a lot of other canvases. I have some in other size. I have some black ones. I don't have any old ones. I don't have any DIY ones, because these are honestly, when you buy them in bulk, they're so cheap. And to know exactly what the texture is going to be like and not worry about how the paint's going to interact is really nice. Let's talk about safety. Acrylic paint is pretty safe, all things considered. You don't need a respirator, you don't need anything like that. And the pre-stretched canvas, the only like danger might be like dropping it on your foot or something. Don't eat it. That being said, it is pretty easy to use, it's pretty easy to work with, it's pretty safe. Like, these are often the kind of paint you give to kids. it is plastic. So you want to make sure that you do not eat it. You don't want to leave it on your skin for too long. You don't want to drink your paint water, because then you're consuming all that plastic plus whatever the pigment is, and some pigments are really dangerous. So you want to make sure that you're not consuming it at all. Acrylic paint will stain. It is plastic. You will be coating whatever you get the paint on in plastic. So wear clothes that you do not care about. Make sure that everything that cannot be painted is covered or put out of the way. If you do spill paint though, as long as you clean it before it dries, you just clean it with water and it'll come right up. The other thing to talk about is this is plastic. So when you have your paint water, which you put in a different container than your regular water, so you do not drink your paint water, you don't want to just dump your paint water into the ground. You don't want to just dump it back down your sink, because all the plastic in it will go into the groundwater, and that's not good. The most eco-friendly way and easiest is you're going to take your paintbrush that you have painted. You're going to take a rag, which I didn't grab, so rag, squish all the paint off, rinse your paintbrush in your water, and then you can treat it with brush soap. You can also use Dawn and olive oil if you don't have brush soap. I prefer the bars to this, but this does work really, really well too. Then you will squish your brush to be the right shape and let it dry. Your paint water then, once you have gotten this, is you can either treat it with a few different chemicals to make it instantly solidify, and then you just filter it. That's a lot, and then you have to use other chemicals, and those chemicals can be really dangerous. They're like quicklime and stuff, and that's a lot. If you're bulk painting and you need to bulk get rid of paint quickly, that's a good way to do it. But otherwise, where you wash your brushes, then you just set this somewhere warm, dry, that pets or children cannot get into, and you just let it dry. So the water will evaporate, great, and then you can just either scrape or have a paint cup with paint filled. So I just let the paint dry, and then we have a beautiful paint jar. So don't drink your paint water, don't just dump the plastic down the drain, and also don't beat yourself too much up if you didn't know that you weren't supposed to rinse your acrylic water down the drain. It's not like it's labeled on any of the things or anything. One more note, I've said this a bajillion times, acrylic paint is plastic. If you leave the paint on your paintbrush, there is no saving it. Unless you're gonna very carefully scrape and scrub, you are going to mess up your paintbrushes. It will be like you just stuck them in Plastidip. So you need to rinse and take care of your brushes with acrylic paint. And then you'll have somebody who looks like this. This one's silicone, not paint, but you get the idea. That's not very usable anymore. I'm not gonna go too into depth about different kinds of paintbrushes right now because we've talked so much about paint and canvas, but when we do another painting section, we will talk about brushes. I will say though, for most acrylic paint, what's going to be the best is high quality synthetic brushes. You don't really need to break out your organic boar hair brushes. I also do recommend brushes over sponges for almost everything. There's a time and place for those sponges, the dollar store sponges you get, but brushes are going to work better for almost every medium. That is all of our safety stuff. That is some explorations of these different mediums, and some tips and safety. Oh, one more thing. Besides brushes, canvas, paint, you are gonna want some kind of mixing thing. These are actual artist palettes that are specifically made for mixing. I am a trash goblin and never clean my palettes. You probably should, and again, don't just put this in the sink, throw it away, or keep them. I like to keep my paint remains and put them into resin projects because they look very cool. But yeah, I probably should spend some time and actually clean this. And then you get these really cool color chips. I like to suspend these in clear resin, so it's less wasteful and I think that looks cool. These two are actual plates that you get from an art store. I think this one's a couple dollars, and then this one is part of a set, so he's a little bit more expensive, but this is a hand-me-down. But you can use literally any plastic thing that you like. You can go get A disposable plate's fine, a yogurt cup. Cardboard is also a really great temporary palette, and then you just chuck it in the bin. You don't want to use anything super absorbent, so like paper towels will not work, but like anything like a cardboard, a plastic plate, anything like that will make a great palette. All right, I'm not going to be teaching you expressly how to paint. I'm not an expert in acrylic painting. I'm gonna put links to some of the resources that helped me learn, plus, you know, like stuff that I watched to get better. Because we're not a master at this medium. So typically what my process is that I do is I spend a lot of time looking and getting input. So that can be things like art books, that can be things like going outside and looking at leaves, that can be Pinterest. I tend to avoid things like Instagram. It's too perfect and it's too constricted to that one size. So we've sketched, we're warmed up, we've primed our canvas, we're sketched our canvas. Let me tell y'all a little bit of a secret. Nice, easy to breathe sealant is hairspray. A lot of other sealants you can get to seal pencil, you can't use inside because they're super toxic. Don't huff hairspray, but you can spray hairspray inside. It is not as effective as professional grade sealant, but it's a lot cheaper, it works really well, and it's a lot less toxic. So we're gonna do our postmortem. So successful, it is a painting. I like the color palettes. I think I did a good job with the clouds. The face isn't perfect. I'm not in love. The skin tone turned out better than I thought it was gonna be. And I think I successfully got the heads in the cloud kind of vibe going on. But yeah, let me know what you think. Once this dries, we're gonna hang it on the wall and I'll show you our salon wall. And that's gonna be it for this time, and I'll see y'all next week. Let me know what you guys think about our work of art. Let me know how you feel. If acrylic paint seems less scary, and I'll see y'all next week.